my great pleasure to have this panel on how industry can and should cooperate, be involved with marine conservation and MPAs in particular. And to my right is Diane Figuera from RARE. To my second right, to my right is Fiona Merida from the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, and then there's Kyobal Sakuma, who is from the Nature Conservancy and also based in Palau.
Correct.
That's right. Lu Xianglu from Fugro.
Yep.
And it's great to have your input here too, Lu. And then Wang Songlin from the Qingdao Marine Conservation Society. The pressures, the demands on the ocean, as we're all familiar with and we've been talking about, are intense, and the calls upon the ocean involve the need to conserve biodiversity, the need for economic returns in certain ways from the ocean, and also the need for social and economic equality and justice. And often propositions that involve all three dimensions, or in which all three dimensions are touted, are portrayed as win-win propositions. That there's some magic formula in which all of those three dimensions, industry, equity, conservation, can all be met. And we had a chat earlier on, and most, if not all of us, think that that is the wrong way to look at things, that there are always costs and there are always benefits. And in effect, because of that, there are trade-offs. And really, with a mindset that takes on board that trade-offs exist, and the important thing is to lessen the costs, or to at least to know what the benefits you seek are, is a much more fruitful approach to thinking, in particular, about industry's involvement in marine conservation. It's certainly essential. We'll have a following panel on tourism, but it has an impact, and we're here to talk about that. And first of all, really to ask, what can industry bring to the story and to the challenge of 30 by 30? How can small countries be helped versus big ones? How to involve the local community? And another area equally important, how to leverage data and technology. How to measure both the baseline and how to measure the outcome. I'd love all of your thoughts and your experiences, and I'd love you all, preferably to disagree with each other from time to time, because that makes for great listening. But I'm sorry, that's just the journalist talking. Lu, why don't you start about some of your priorities and the way you see things? And you are a company that is heavily involved in the ocean, representing various interests, in effect trying to understand what actually is there in the ocean.
Yeah, to go back to your questions about to understand what will be the trade-off, right? And this is where I think you mentioned that the baseline, and this is where the data come in. Yeah, we need to know where we are today and where we want to go. So we need to have the comprehensive data set about the particular area, and then use that to model it. And because now with all the AI technology and all these things, and you can model, and you can actually factor in the climate change factor, and also the ocean excitations and so forth, and then come up with a more proper MPA destination strategy, and then actually use it to map the whole net economies, I would say the net ecosystem value to the largest community. Because without producing a predictable outcome, it's very hard for us to convince what is the need for the community and what is positive impact and what is the inaction. And this is where we can leverage the advanced innovation acquisition from the private company. Very often we're talking about the data, but I think we need to precisely look at what is the effective data acquisition strategy and how can we combine the various acquisition tools that we have in the industry. For example, how could we make use of the satellite observation data, the imaging to enhance it, and then so that we can have the sea to land survey path. Because we have a various tools, it's how to make it effective and how we can make it impact to the whole solution that we want to build.
Thank you. And Song-Ling, would you want to add your perspective at this point to this? You know, what in your view, what are the kind of starting ingredients that are needed when dealing with these trade-offs?
For the trade-offs, certainly I can first maybe echo what Lou said about how important it is to have data. And one way to get very useful data is from the industry and the community. We have one example. So we work with the fishing industry and the fishing community to a fishery improvement project. And from that project, we actually get very important seahorse habitat distribution data from the bottom trawlers, which certainly we hope in the longer run we will reduce the bottom trawling capacity in the area and set up certain spatial protect zones, and that can either be bottom trawling free or it can be like a seasonal or even spatial protected areas. So that is one example. So how data is useful and how data can be collected and how the industry and the community is going to play a role in that and trade-offs. But having said that, I think at a broader kind of a global perspective, where we are for the 30 by 30, and probably we only protect less than 5% or 10% of the global seas and oceans. I can take China as example. The seas around China is only maybe 4% or less than 5% legally protected as a marine protected area. What are the remaining areas that are deemed as biodiversity hotspots? They are almost all of the areas fishing grounds. Some areas are used by tourism and the aquaculture industry. Then how to do with that? I think probably a more pragmatic approach is to engage in the fishing industry, the fish farming, aquaculture industry, and the tourism industry, the multiple users to help keep kind of based on data mitigating their negative impacts on the environment, on the fisheries resources, on the biodiversity, and trying to encourage, incentivize them to move toward more natural positive solutions or future, and in the meantime trying to potentially set up their fishing ground, the seas or the islands that they use for to operate their, for example, tourism industry as kind of OECM candidates, other effective area-based conservation measures candidates. Certainly, I am a big kind of a supporter for 30 by 30 and for biodiversity conservation, I think. But with the existing kind of justifiable social economic development needs, we just need to figure out where and how to strike deals and how to make trade-offs.
Thank you. And am I right in thinking that you would all agree that government subsidies that support uneconomical or environmentally unsustainable fishing, which is the case with many states, China included, shipbuilding and fuel, that those subsidies need to go before one can sort of even think about a sort of level playing field. Fiona, I'd like to turn to you because I don't think anywhere in the world has as much experience balancing conservation and economic interests, tourism, fishing, and more than Australia and the Great Barrier Reef. So it would be great to have, your sense of both of how you've gone about that with GBR, but what the kind of chief factors are that you juggle and struggle with.
I guess first of all, maybe my lived experience, I don't perceive that a trade-off needs to occur. I think that where the planet is heading right now, everybody that's living on it almost has to have their heads in the sand not to understand what we've been discussing at this conference today. I think what's been really exciting in that debate is that for a long time, oceans were and they continue to be understudied, but I come from a place that's one of the most studied locations on planet Earth in the Great Barrier Reef. And so a lot of the focus was on coral reefs and understanding coral reefs. And it was a small group of people with the same sort of degrees, the same background and experience. And while I've been at this conference, we're bringing so many minds to the table now to help tackle this wicked problem. And I think it's only when you start to look at this as a global problem for humanity that you're starting to bring these solutions to the table. So when they zoned the Great Barrier Reef, it was based on knowledge of people that were out on the water. It's the size of Japan as a place, so it's an enormous area. It was based on that knowledge, people flying in planes and seeing what they could see from the air and going, that looks like a significant location and there's probably coral reef there. People getting into the water, dive teams, and then laying out an enormous, protected area program that is representative, where 20% of 70 bioregions are protected there, because those are what helps inform it keeps the ecosystem healthy for coral reefs. Now, if you fast forward to where we are now, the mapping capabilities that exist in that technology alone is significant and phenomenal. You have industry coming to the table. What we need now is, where my colleague to the right comes into play, is the sustainable financing to help enable and support that. So I believe that if you focus on the right use happening in the right places, that ocean protection can also be economically viable and make economic sense. And for a country like Australia that is surrounded by ocean, and we have 48% of our ocean protected, so 30-30 for us is, we still want to continue to raise the bar in that space because we only have 28% that's fully no-take zones. But people shouldn't get caught up on no-take zones. If they do the mapping and they understand the asset, then you can look at ensuring that use is complementary, if not a benefit, to the protection of that location.
And are indeed, just to follow on from your point, are indeed non-no-take zones really only possible and sort of enforceable if, is it necessary to have no-take zones around or near no-take zones? What is the risk of there being very little buy-in from fishing interests and others to a no-take zone if there are not opportunities around for them?
Well, this is the complexity. So, for Australia, the Great Barrier Reef tourism industry is worth about $6 billion. The fishing industry for the whole of Australia brings in $3 billion to GBT. So that it doesn't make economic sense in Australia to be fully extractive and focusing on that. If you can have a place that holds a economic driver that is to do no harm but to appreciate, and you can leverage that, then that's where the magic starts to happen. However, the reality for a lot of other places is that a large percentage of their GDP is coming from fishing practices, and therefore you need to have a mosaic where you're enabling a spillover effect. And the spillover effect has finally been proven and demonstrated. It's taken 20 years of long-term studying and effort of protection. But what you also have to do is you have to enforce those marine protected no-take zones. So whenever you put a no-take zone in, you have to think about the compliance that is involved. So for Australia, there's a $50 million program that is just from having people on the water, in the air, linked to customs to ensure that those zones are absolutely protected. But without the buy-in of the people driving the government drives the policy. So it is always at the grassroots, bottom up, and then a top-down approach where you're meeting in the middle.
So the importance of buy-in and enough of a challenge in a country like Australia, which has had long experience of this. I would, like you, want to ask in a second, ask you, Diane, about the importance of finance. But first to Keobel, because you're concerned at TNC in Palau with protection, but on a huge ocean scale, a small state, and strong fishing interests that need to be managed carefully. And I just wanted to ask you about, how you see the challenges and what you see as the priorities here.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. And I don't mean to be contrarian to any of the the statements that have been made in regard to marine protected areas, but I think there needs to be a very clear distinction between marine protected areas in coastal zones and then the large-scale marine protected areas in the offshore zones, because there is a considerable economic difference, a size difference, and the trade-offs there are vastly different than the trade-offs in the small-scale coastal areas. In the case of the Marshall Islands, their economic revenue annually from industrial commercial tuna fishing is $45 million annually, and if you're going to achieve the 30 by 30 target, we have to move beyond the coastal MPAs and into the offshore spaces. However, this is just magnified in terms of the cost to benefit ratio. Of course, there's identified benefits, but like Fiona said, the actual science behind the spillover effect has not necessarily been proven in the offshore spaces. I mean, the tuna stocks are highly migratory, and they travel across the Western and Central Pacific Ocean. So if you're going to be asking these least developed countries, the small island developing states, to contribute to that 30 by 30 goal, we need to come to them with economic solutions. They're not going to close off their borders to fishing just because it's the right thing to do. These countries depend highly on this economic revenue for their GDP, and without it, they're lost. And so, I think I'm very anxious to hear Diane's sustainable finance discussion, and this kind of goes for the entire Pacific region. The Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Regional Fisheries Management Organization has been credited to manage the only healthy tuna stocks in the world. And I think we need to include MPAs in the solution for their ocean management, but not look only at that. We need to look beyond that into OECMs, into these market-driven management methods, and TNC is involved in a couple of those, developing these market transformations within the tuna industry that take into account sustainability, that take into account conservation, but also are vastly aware of the importance of the economic revenue going to these specific countries.
So in effect, just to follow on from this, you're engaged in supply chains, transnational supply chains, in effect. I mean, if there's an economic area, economic incentive, you want to ensure that well-caught tuna hits the shelves of American supermarkets. But I mean, which is great when it works, but it's highly complex, right?
It is highly complex. However, TNC as an organization is large enough to kind of tackle that concept and that project. And in fact, we have over 58 countries that we work in ocean-related sustainability projects. A lot of them small-scale coastal MPAs. However, we need to move beyond that and start looking at the large ocean spaces, not only within zones, within the country's EEZs, but also in the areas beyond national jurisdiction. So it's another motivating factor to get the BB&J Treaty ratified by the UN Ocean Conference in June.
Great, thank you. Well, and I think we would all like to hear from Diane about the importance of financing and where the priorities are. I mean, presumably, there are currently different financing models, Western philanthropies, presumably a decreasing amount of official bilateral aid to count on. I don't know whether Pacific Island states do use day license fees to help with, for instance, coastal conservation, which would join up with offshore and coastal conservation. And this morning, Peter Thompson was suggesting a bit of ticket clipping, coupon clipping, by taking a tiny fee off the subsea cables that are, running around the ocean. But what's missing and what's needed?
Yeah, so before I answer that question, maybe, RARE is really, we advocate for community-led conservation, so we always try to bring the voice of the local communities in platforms like this. So, I agree with you that we have to move past like the coastal areas, but of course, we know that only 17% of the coastal areas are actually protected, and it is where biodiversity is highest. It is where 80% of the coral reefs are, 100% of the mangroves, and 100% of the seagrass beds are. So I think there is potential for us to reach simultaneously going beyond coastal areas, but at the same time, still looking at working of protecting, increasing the protection of our coastal areas. So in terms of like financing needs, there has been a lot of discussion since yesterday about the need for financing, the need to engage the private sector in financing, given that the ODA and other forms of financing may be significantly reduced. And what we have now is just one. It will not answer all. It will not, all we need is like one potential proof of concept that could be scaled and that could serve as an inspiration or a reference for structuring other forms of financing for the ocean. So I'd like to tell you more about our RARE's small-scale fisheries impact bonds. So this is not, there are actually around 200 impact bonds around the world, and this is the first of its kind for small-scale fisheries. So it's actually like an oxymoron. It's not really a bond that you issue, like the typical blue bonds that we issue. But this impact bond is, it actually combines blended finance as well as outcome-based model, where we have risk investors who provide the initial capital to finance all the activities related to conservation and even restoration of the blue economy, including and these are really based on pre-agreed outcomes, and these outcomes include establishment of locally managed MPAs, establishment of the governance structure, establishment of fisheries management boards who will govern the management of the MPAs. And there's also science to it, because part of the outcomes for that impact bond is really stabilization and increase of fish biomass and benthic coverage. So actually it brings together all the things that we have discussed, bringing together the private sector. So the private sector funds this. We bring together those that are doing data, because the payment to the investor is actually based on the outcomes that are actually achieved. And we do that through a third-party evaluator who needs to use data tools so that the payments will actually be made only when outcomes are achieved. So I guess this is a very small pilot, but it will pave the way. And surprisingly, most of our investors, they're not actually ocean-based industries. They're investors who just have like an interest in the ocean, or they have some decision makers who have the passion to invest in the oceans. So I guess at some point when we scale this kind of innovative financing mechanism, we can already really engage the ocean-based industries to really invest in the ecosystem where their business models are actually based on.
So it's not necessarily lessening if you go down the route of seeking money from bigger businesses, it's not necessarily to lessen their own footprint in the ocean. Is that right? But they would have an interest in sustainable fishing or in conservation.
Yeah, it would. I think it would start with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes both ways. They would have an interest, but at the same time, I think for those who initially invested in this, they just want to create a proof of concept, because we always think about innovative financing mechanisms, but the private sector is not seeing anything yet, anything tangible. So we want to create that proof of concept. So maybe for now, it's really based on their interest, but eventually, those with ocean as part of their business strategy or as part of their revenue stream can really be deliberate in investing in these types of
And what sort of size in money terms and in terms of the size of a fishery, for instance, are you talking about in a say?
So this is very small. This is just 6 million, USD size. But then there is this is piloted in Southeast Sulawesi in Indonesia. But then there are already talks about really scaling this. So we're looking at around 70 to 120 million dollars in size of investments.
Well, that's great. Am I right in thinking, and in fact, you have all sort of talked to this, in thinking that actually conservation is painstaking, step by step, very detail oriented. It's not just drawing a circle on a chart, right? And that's important for lay people like me, I think, to understand. I'm going to throw it open to the floor in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you all a bit about what role business industry can play in the running of marine protected areas. I mean, there's often money to set an MPA up, and often one of the chief reasons an MPA fails, and many do fail, is because there's been given insufficient thought into funding an MPA long term. Who would like to speak to that? Go on.
Is that all right if I take this? I think there's a long list of failed MPAs because of that reason. Lack of planning, and this is kind of historic through the history of MPAs. So lack of planning, lack of accounting for the economic loss, not enough community consultation, and really that during the early days in the coastal MPAs, it was kind of like that. But as the MPA world developed and these things were kind of taken into account, ideas like Diane's and management plans like Fiona's really kind of brought that concept of a holistic management process for the MPAs to where it is now for coastal MPAs. I think for offshore MPAs, we're still kind of in this infancy stage where we're determining what the loss to benefits are. We're determining what the costs are. We're determining what the science needs, where the science needs to be in order to manage these. So I think industry can play a huge part in that, specifically in the case of the Pacific region. We have a tuna industry that's worth $6 billion annually. And just to give context, the countries, although they have really set up a great system of management, they still are disproportionately carrying the burden of conservation management and only receiving a very small portion of the value of that resource. So I think, it took quite a while to get to where we are with coastal MPAs. And I think we can use those lessons learned to accelerate the process in these offshore MPAs to really get a standard in place to drive this 2030 goal to fruition. And I think it was Virgil in your presentation, you mentioned, we have, the need to get to 2030, you would need to establish either 190,000 smaller MPAs, coastal MPAs, or 300 large-scale offshore MPAs. So that kind of just gives a context to the importance of this new kind of emerging concept of the large-scale MPAs. But we can't forget that it's only a part of the solution. We have the entire ocean, and the 30% commitment is only one part. There's 100% effective management, and I think that is key for the long-term sustainable health of the oceans.
Thank you.
Maybe to add, in the perspective of local or the coastal MPAs, we always look into making sure that we look also into the financial resilience of the local communities that are managing the MPAs, because the primary, it will always be their primary objective to put food on the table. So especially for countries like coastal countries like the Philippines or Indonesia, where the average monthly income of our small-scale fishers are just over a little over $100 USD. So there is a need for us to really make sure that they're financially resilient, they have the proper social protection, they have the savings to get by during the rainy day. Otherwise, no amount of science or no amount of conversation to get their buy-in will really work unless they are sure that they're financially resilient.
Yes. Songlin and then Lou, please.
Okay, thank you. In my view, I regularly deal with the coastal and island MPAs. There isn't actually a clear line between industry and residential communities. In many cases, some of the local seafood industry and the tourism leaders are actually from the communities, whereas there are also community fishers, fish farmers, guides. But I think in the experience, I feel my sense is that it's very important to have two conditions. One is that there need to be a very clear law regulation in place demanding for multiple uses, kind of setting up the rules of the game and confessing or acknowledging there's a need for trade-offs, but there are also bottom lines. For example, MPA needs to take biodiversity, ecosystem or habitat or certain target species or species groups as a priority. And then having said that, it's also very important to figure out how to use policy, law, regulation, financial incentives to empower, enable, and data to empower and enable the industry representatives and the communities to be co-managers of these protected areas or OECM, whatever the form it is. The reasons are that only those group of people previously subject to management, to regulation, have a sense of ownership in this shared kind of responsibility in this shared marine spatial area. Are they more likely to be organized themselves to be more compliant in the rules and the regulations? And they, particularly when they know that they have their kind of tenure and or access to the natural resources, there is kind of somehow dependent on their capacity to ensure that the ecosystem productivity integrity is in place in the longer run. So that's the tips.
Important point. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to share my thought after listening to my colleagues' opinion here. How I see the establishment of the MPA is not different from how we set up a built environment project, how you build a wind farm or how you build an oil and gas platform, in a way that you need to define what is the outcome that you want. All right. So once you know exactly what is the benefit and the outcome that you want to achieve, and then you look at what is your risk. And how to identify the risk is, I think I just hear like some of my colleagues say, you need to leverage on the technology. For example, I hear a lot about data. You need to leverage on the advanced innovation acquisition strategy. And then the policy, you need to bridge them together, the policy. And also, I think at the end of the day is the net economy's value, the impact to the community. So there is no difference that compared to how you want to attack the project. So I think we can address the MPA issue and by bridging the best practices from the outside the marine environment and using the science-based approach to bridge them, the science, policy, technology, and the finance. And that is my opinion there.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, but there will be questions that you all, I hope, will want to put to the panel and hear from the panel about. So it's time to throw it open to the floor. Who would like to put our panel on the spot? No arms going up there? Well, just to sort of cycle back, I would love to talk a little bit more about finance, but partly because it's a topic that I understand probably least. But I just, I mean, how worried are you about the amount of finance that can underpin conservation? How to scale up your projects? Maybe just to ask a pesky question of you, Gyobel. The big sums of money come from Western philanthropists. What are the sort of risks? I don't want to call it, it's not colonialism, it's well beyond that. But you mentioned top down and bottom up, but you have Western money and with it Western views. I mean, thank God the money's there, because there wouldn't be any otherwise. But it meets, very different circumstances on the ground or on the water from those who are offering the money. And it's a difficult question maybe or topic, but just the fact that, a lot of scientific expertise and a lot of money comes from the rich part of the world, and a lot of the places that need protecting come from the global south. Oh, yes, and now we've got, three, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't see you at the back there. And yes, if we can keep 2 short questions, we probably just have time, and the lady here with the blue shawl afterwards.
Well, I was actually going to ask a finance-related question, so maybe I'm saving you, Dominic, from trying to formulate your own.
Good, thank you.
Just following on from the panel yesterday that I was on about finance, and a lady asked the question about, how can industry participate in financing mechanisms? I just thought this was probably the perfect panel to throw that question back at you, because I know that that's something that we've worked on at WWF. And Song Lin, I think you're involved in Fishery
Yes.
Improvement Fund, which is one effort to bring a sort of fee-based mechanism into supporting, in that case, fishery improvement projects, which is not MPAs, but it could be MPAs, could be anything, any restoration type activity. And just, I know the Great Barrier Reef, I think you have some kind of system that's not that dissimilar to that, a user fee type. So just wondering the panel's views on how likely that is, how you would manage that, and whether that represents something we should be scaling up.
Good, sharp question, and I think let's take the question from you as well, and so let's have 2 questions at a bundle, and then brief responses you'd like to start.
Yeah, I just had a question about in the Pacific. I was hearing about with the Marshall Islands, there's a tuna, Pacific Island tuna, and I just wondered maybe if I could hear some of the details of that. Thank you.
Okay, well, Fiona, would you like to?
I think that for us in the Great Barrier Reef, every user, every visitor that comes as a tourist has to pay an environmental management charge, and that money goes directly back into the protection and management of the Great Barrier Reef. At the moment, that charge is linked to the GDP in Brisbane, and that each visitor only pays $7.50. But we undertook a major study, social science study, which demonstrated that the visitors were prepared to pay up to 10 times that amount if they knew that their dollar was actually going into the protection and you were able to link that dollar back. I think you've hit the nail on the head, because looking at the charging structures for these marine protected areas, I know for the Great Barrier Reef and for the oceans surrounding, everybody's assumed that the use of the ocean is free, and for a long time it has been. So for the Great Barrier Reef, there's 73 cruise ships that come through and they pay an environmental management charge, but there's 14,000 ships that traverse through the Great Barrier Reef that don't pay a cent. So I'm not trying to become the enemy of the shipping industry or in trade and the cost of trade, but for a very long time, oceans and the transit of oceans and through these areas has been free. And that's why it's become more economically viable to take goods that way rather than through air. And that's what we need to be looking at as a global ocean community.
So, yeah, transit fees and this huge scope to raise visiting fees. It's great to hear that. I'm very glad you brought the question up. Thank you. Tuna, maybe to Kyobul, and just very briefly, because we're already overrunning our time.
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. I think the case of every MPA design is unique, and you can't really kind of plug and play certain situations in any jurisdiction and expect it to work. In the case of the Pacific, there are countries that have tourism and there are countries that don't. And in the Marshall Islands, they don't have a lot of tourism revenue coming in. So we had to kind of design a sustainable financing mechanism that took that into account. The main source of revenue, like I said, is industrial commercial tuna fishing. So what we did is partner with the Republic of the Marshall Islands to create Pacific Island Tuna. So it's a co-owned company that operates in the tuna space. It buys and sells tuna as any other tuna company would. However, it's owned by the Republic of the Marshall Islands. So now they participate in this value chain beyond just providing rent to fish their waters. They benefit from their resource from the time it's caught to the time it's sold on shelves. And one of the key successes of this has been partnership with Walmart, Costco, and Sam's Club. Those are our three main retailers that have partnered with us to supply sustainably caught tuna to Walmart shelves. And the key to that is having these sustainability covenants built into the company. So all product caught under PIT flagged vessels has to be 100% electronic monitored. It has to have dockside offload, and 40% of all the revenue that is made by Pacific Island Tuna goes back into coastal community conservation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. And thank you, panelists here. Lots to talk about, lots of conversations to continue in the sidelines, so please do continue them. And for now, please join me in a round of applause for Song Ling, Lou, Kyobul, Diane, and Fiona. Thank you very much indeed.